What is the definition of government debt? And what is the current U.S. government debt today? So the answer to what is debt is the total amount owed, or it's the accumulation of all past and current deficits and surpluses. So let's look at the U.S. debt clock. Now this is 35 trillion, 412 billion, 326 million, 570,000 and some odd hundreds of dollars. We're going to look at this number here. This is in millions, and we're going to start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Every 24 seconds, the U.S. government overspends. This is not government spending. It overspends by $1 million every 24 seconds. Let's see how they continue to overspend. Let's look at the term deficit. What does it mean when you hear that the U.S. government is running a deficit? A deficit is when spending is greater than revenue during a period of 1 year. So deficit spending is how much does the U.S. government overspend in a year compared to what it brings in a year in revenue. First off, we'll look at revenue collected. Government revenue is income received from taxes and other sources to pay for government expenditures. The U.S. government has collected $4.39 trillion in fiscal year 2024. Next, let's look at spending. The U.S. government has spent $6.29 trillion in fiscal year 2024 to ensure the well-being of the people of the United States. Because the government spends more than what it brings in, it runs a deficit. A deficit occurs when the federal government spending exceeds its revenues. The federal government has spent $1.9 trillion more than it has collected in fiscal year 2024. When the government runs a deficit, this increases the debt. The national debt is the total amount of outstanding borrowing by the U.S. federal government accumulated over the nation's history. So the U.S. government debt is 35 trillion, 296 billion, 367 million, $284,952. In 2013, I gave one of the first TEDx talks at the University of Arizona entitled The Federal Budget Demystified by Reponomics.com. Here is an excerpt of that TEDx talk. Like as far as pages inside the budget for fiscal year 2011, and it was 2,582 pages. And when you look at spending, there's what's called mandatory spending, and there's discretionary spending. And the discretionary spending is what you hear a lot about when comparing the Trump and the Biden administration, but no one's really talking about what's called mandatory spending. In 2013, comparing 2004, 2010, and 2013, and when you notice, the largest expenditures are what are called mandatory spending. Social Security spending, income security spending for social programs, the net interest on the debt, Medicare spending, and health spending. This is called mandatory spending. Mandatory spending takes up a large percentage of the federal budget spending. So let's look at what's called discretionary spending. As you can tell, the numbers are a heck of a lot smaller. And what we're going to do is compare the Trump's mandatory and discretionary spending compared to the Biden-Harris mandatory and discretionary spending, comparing the years 2019, 3 years after Trump was in office, and 2023, when the Biden-Harris administration was in office. Let's start with the revenues brought in by the Trump administration. As you can tell, the revenues were $3.5 trillion. And as you can see, individual income taxes is the largest share, but another larger share are the payroll taxes of Social Security and Medicare. And then the small chunk is the corporate income tax, and the other includes tariffs or custom duties, along with the state tax and other types of taxes that the US government collects. When you look at the outlays are at $4.4 trillion. And as you can see, there's what's called discretionary spending. This is what Congress has discretion over. And as you can see, defense and non-defense is considered to be discretionary. The mandatory spending, though, is much larger than the discretionary spending that you hear all about. But mandatory spending is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other types of spending. And the net interest is the interest that has to be paid on the debt. And when you look at 3.5 trillion in receipts or revenue and outlays or government spending of 4.4 trillion, you can see that the deficit is just under $1 trillion at about 900 and some odd billion dollars. When you look at the revenue and the outlays or the expenditures or spending by the Biden-Harris administration 3 years into their administration in 2023, the pie charts look a little different than what you saw with the Trump administration, but they do show the same types of collections of revenue and the same types of outlays or spending, but in a different pie chart format. But what's important is to see that the total revenues are 4.4 trillion and the total outlays or the total spending is 6.1 trillion, which means the Biden-Harris administration in 2023 ran a deficit of $1.7 trillion, where the Trump administration in 2019 ran a deficit of just over $900 billion. Hope this video helps you understand the difference between debt and deficits of the Trump and the Biden-Harris administrations.